Clara May Thompson stood at the edge of the dusty road, her eyes locked on the whitewashed chapel that crowned the hill. The wooden doors were closed, but the murmurs from within drifted through the heat like ghostly reminders of a life she no longer belonged to. She adjusted the frayed lace on her shawl, as if doing so might erase the brand the town had seared into her name: unfit, shameful, ruined. It had been a year since she'd walked down that very aisle, not as a bride, but as the weeping sister of a dying man. In the wake of her brother's funeral, whispers sprouted like weeds, a stolen kiss behind the granary. A late-night visit from a boy who didn't stay. By the time Billy Hart broke off their engagement, blaming pressure from his family and claiming Clara had tempted him, her fate was sealed. No one asked her side. No one cared to. Eleanor Harper had led the charge, eyes gleaming behind her lace fan as she told every woman in town that Clara was not the sort to raise children or wear white. Her parents, God-fearing and terrified of scandal, turned their backs on her. Clara, once the most promising girl in Bell Cross, was now a seamstress scraping coins from torn petticoats and broken hems. She lived alone in a shack behind the old blacksmith's forge. No visitors, no friends, only her needles, her prayers, and the ever-growing bitterness she tried to silence with hymns. But today something was different. A new priest had arrived. Word spread fast in Bell Cross. Padre Elias Mendoza, they said, Mexican by birth, sent from Tucson to clean the rot out of the parish. No one had mentioned what he looked like, only that he wore plain clothes, spoke softly, and had eyes that seemed to see more than what stood before him. Clara hadn't expected him to look at her, but he had. As he stepped down from the stagecoach and brushed the dust from his cassock, their eyes met. A moment, brief but unwavering. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He nodded. And for the first time in a long while, Clara's breath caught not from shame, but from the memory of what it felt like to be acknowledged. If Clara's fight for dignity in a world that turned its back on her speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. There's more to come. She turned from the chapel doors, the weight on her shoulders no lighter, but somehow more bearable. Something was shifting. She didn't know what or why, but the look in the Padre's eyes had unsettled the silence she had built around her soul. And just like that, hope crept in. Not loud, not certain, but there. She walked home slowly, one hand clutching the shawl, the other brushing against the letters she had never dared to send. Letters she might soon have reason to write again. The knock on Clara's door came just after sunset. She froze mid-stitch, needle hovering above a frayed cuff, her heartbeat rising like a gunshot in the silence. No one knocked. Not in a year. She wiped her hands on her skirt and opened the door slowly, half expecting a prank, or worse, a threat. But it was him. Padre Elias stood with his hat in hand, dusk painting his features in gold and rust. "Miss Thompson," he said with a slight nod, "I hope I'm not disturbing your work." Clara's voice stuck in her throat. She stepped aside, unsure whether to speak or flee. "I won't stay long," he added. "I'm simply visiting my flock." She blinked. "I wasn't aware I still belonged to one." His eyes softened. "Faith doesn't have doors, Miss Thompson. Nor do grace or mercy." He glanced around the cramped room, taking in the stacks of fabric, the rickety table, the worn Bible beside her bed. Not judgmental, not pitying, just noticing. Like he saw her but didn't measure her. They sat. He asked about her work, her brother, even her garden, now wild but still blooming with stubborn marigolds. She answered with careful words, watching his hands, his eyes, waiting for the change. But it never came. He listened. Not as a priest absolving sin, nor a man assessing worth. Just as someone who knew silence and carried it well. "I believe in second soil," he said suddenly, eyes on the floorboards. "Land that's been burned, trampled, stripped, but with time grows stronger crops. Not in spite of the wounds, because of them." She stared, throat tight. "Why are you really here?" He looked up. "Because I think you know what it means to survive the fire. And I need that kind of truth in my church." Clara shook her head, almost laughing. "You don't know what they think of me." "I know what I see," he replied. And then he stood, nodding once more before stepping into the dusk. The next morning, the town was buzzing. Whispers flew like vultures. The Padre had visited the Thompson girl, alone, after dark. Some said he was naive. Others said worse. Eleanor Harper's voice rang the loudest, dripping with indignation in the general store, warning that no decent priest would call on a girl like Clara unless he'd already been seduced. Clara, hearing the murmurs as she delivered a hemmed shirt, kept her eyes down and her face calm. But inside something shifted. Not defiance, not yet, but a flicker of boldness. A notion that maybe silence wasn't her only shield. Back home she lit a candle not for her sins, but for the man who saw her not as what she was called, but for what she still could become. And if you believe that being seen, truly seen, can change a person's path, stay with us. There's more to come. Eleanor Harper sat in her parlor, lips pursed like she'd bitten into vinegar. The morning light poured in through lace curtains, but her expression was all storm. He visited her, she hissed to her circle of Sunday wives, each more scandalized than the last. Twice now, after dark. The women gasped. One dropped her teacup. Clara May Thompson is a stain on this town, Eleanor snapped. And now the church allows her influence? We're being tested. That same afternoon, Sheriff Cole McGraw knocked on Clara's door. He didn't ask to come in, just stood on the porch, arms crossed over a badge that had started to weigh heavier lately. I heard you've had company, he said. Clara leaned against the doorframe, eyes steady. It's not a crime to be visited by a man of God. Maybe not, he replied, glancing past her shoulder. But you know this town. They spook easy. They see smoke and think fire. She folded her arms. Then let them come ask me what they saw for once. He didn't smile, didn't scold either, just touched the brim of his hat and walked off. And somehow that unsettled her more. She hadn't wanted to believe the town still had that much power over her. But it did. Every sideways glance, every lowered voice, every child pulled away when she passed. She thought about packing again. She even laid out her one good dress and counted the coins in her jar. Then came the soft knock at dusk. Elias, again. I heard you're considering leaving, he said. Clara stared, weary. You don't know what it's like walking through that market like a disease. I don't, he admitted. But I know what it means to be judged by shadows people never saw. She looked at him, waiting. I was 18, he said. My father drank himself to death. My mother begged the priest not to bury him, said he didn't deserve hallowed ground. So I buried him myself under a juniper tree. The town said I was cursed. Clara blinked, silent. I left. I found men who fought dirtier than shame. Then I found God, or he found me, hard to say. He smiled faintly. But I came back, because someone has to. She sat down, breath shallow. Why me? Because I've seen people who hate the dark. But you, he paused, you've learned how to walk through it. That's the kind of strength churches are built on. The next Sunday, Clara did the unthinkable. She entered the chapel. She didn't wear white. She didn't sit up front. She simply stepped through the door and took a seat at the back pew, head held level. A few gasped, others shifted in their seats. But she stayed. And if you've ever felt the weight of 1,000 silent stares and still chose to stand tall, then don't go anywhere. Clara's story is far from finished. The door creaked open as Clara stepped into the rectory, her hands curled tightly around the folds of her apron. Elias had invited her to speak, to share, not as penance, but as witness. She hadn't meant to say much, but the words poured out like rain from cracked earth. I never thought it'd follow me this long, she whispered. One kiss, one mistake. And they made it my whole name. Elias leaned forward, quiet. My father told me to pack before the neighbors did it for me. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. I had to leave my brother's grave before the grass even grew. Her voice trembled. They don't want the truth. They want the story to stay clean. Elias nodded, his voice low. People are more afraid of broken things than evil ones. She looked at him, eyes sharp. And you? What are you afraid of? He didn't flinch. My own silence. He told her of a boy named Matteo, a child he'd once comforted in Tucson, born to a woman branded like Clara. The boy had died of fever. Elias had prayed by his side, but he never defended the mother when the whispers grew. He had been younger then, less brave. "I carry that silence," he said, "but I won't carry it again." That night, Billy Hart returned to Bell Cross. He showed up at Clara's door, drunk on memory and guilt, smelling of tobacco and old regrets. He told her he missed her, that maybe they could make things right. "I was scared," he said, "but I never stopped loving you." Clara laughed, short, sharp. "You loved your father's land. You loved your name, not me." Billy reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "You didn't defend me when it mattered," she said, "and I've learned to live without things that break me." The next morning, Clara walked past the schoolhouse and saw Eleanor Harper behind it, gripping the arm of a young girl. The girl was sobbing, barely 13, cheeks red with shame. Clara froze. "You'll keep your mouth shut," Eleanor hissed, "or I'll see to it you're scrubbing floors like that Thompson girl." When Eleanor turned and saw Clara, the flash of fear in her eyes was brief, but telling. Clara didn't say a word. She just walked on, heart pounding. That girl's face haunted her all night, her own story all over again. She sat at her table until dawn, pen in hand, ink smudged from trembling fingers. The letter she wrote was clear, direct, and addressed to the bishop, not to seek punishment, but truth, and maybe protection for someone else this time. She folded it with care. "And if you've ever faced a moment where staying silent felt like betrayal, stay with us." Clara's voice is only beginning to rise. Eleanor Harper sat in the pew's front row, fanning herself briskly though the chapel was cool. Her eyes never left Clara, who now sat near the center, upright and silent. Around them, the tension hung like dust in sunlight, visible, heavy, unavoidable. The letter had reached its destination. Clara didn't know how she knew, only that something in the air shifted. That week, 2 church elders arrived from Tucson, quiet and watchful. They didn't question her. They observed. By Thursday, Eleanor was pacing her parlor, eyes sharp with suspicion. "She's trying to destroy me," she told Billy, who stood near the door like a cornered boy. "You owe me after all I did for your family." Billy didn't answer. "She'll ruin everything if we let her." Across town, Elias sat with Clara beneath the juniper behind the chapel. He'd taken to walking with her after Vespers. No pretense, no sermons, just quiet conversation under gathering stars. "She's stirring," Clara said, like a hornet hive cracked open. "She knows something's shifting," Elias replied. "People notice what they once ignored." Clara exhaled. "I didn't send that letter to punish, I just couldn't let it keep happening. You did right." He turned to her, voice low. "But be ready. Truth always demands a price." That Sunday the church filled to the brim. Word had spread that Padre Elias would speak on judgment and mercy. Some came curious, others defensive, all waited. He stood behind the pulpit, eyes steady. "We are a town built on stories," he began, "and sometimes we forget that the loudest ones are not always the truest." He spoke not of names, but of hearts, of those who'd been cast aside, of the damage done by whispers and silence, and of the holy task of seeing one another fully, painfully, redemptively. Eleanor sat frozen, her fan still. Clara didn't move. Her hands were clenched, but her gaze was clear. Later that day, Elias found her near the river, eyes on the slow current. "Your voice," he said. "It's no longer shaking." She nodded. "Not today." He looked at her with something deeper than pride. "You are chosen, Clara. Not because you are perfect, because you're willing." She turned to him, the words anchoring deep. For the first time, she didn't flinch from belief. She stepped into it. But across town, Eleanor wasn't finished, and Billy, uncertain and afraid, still listened when he should have spoken. If you've ever stood in the eye of a storm, holding your ground even as the winds howl, don't go anywhere. The fight for truth has just begun. The petition came with 23 signatures, neatly inked and cold as a verdict. Eleanor had marched it straight to the sheriff's office, face tight with indignation. "She's dividing the town," she declared. The church is not a place for harlots or heretics. Sheriff Cole McGraw looked over the names. Most were familiar. Storekeepers, widows, the butcher's wife. People he'd known since boyhood. He didn't look Clara in the eye when he delivered the news. "I don't like this," he muttered, hat in hand. "But I can't ignore it. If you stay, things could turn violent." Clara nodded once, jaw set. She didn't beg, didn't cry. She packed her few things before dawn. Elias stood at her door, eyes shadowed with anger. "You don't have to leave." "I do," she replied. "But not because I'm ashamed. Because this town is still sick, and they'll never heal if I become their scapegoat again." He clenched his fists. "They're using faith as a weapon. And that's why you need to stay." They stood in silence. She placed a hand on his arm, steady. "Keep the door open. One day they'll need it." At sunrise, Clara walked down Main Street alone. No wagon, no escort. Just her and a small sack of clothes. Windows opened. Curtains shifted. No one spoke. Eleanor watched from her porch, triumphant. But that same Sunday, the chapel filled again, this time with unease. Some expected celebration. Others waited to see what Elias would say. He stepped to the pulpit and did not raise his voice. "I let a lamb walk into the wilderness," he said. "Because too many here believe wolves belong in pews and shepherds should bite their tongues." Murmurs spread. "Mercy," he continued, "is not weakness. It is strength. But today, we proved we are weaker than the one we cast out." He paused. "I will not stand with cowards, nor will I close my doors to the wounded." Some stood up and left, but others remained, fewer, quieter, listening. That evening, Elias found Clara by the road's edge, speaking with Widow Alcott, who owned a patch of land beyond the creek. The woman handed Clara a key. "She can stay in the old bunkhouse," she said to Elias. "She's done nothing but tell the truth, and truth deserves a roof." Clara accepted the key, lips trembling. "You said once I was chosen," she whispered. "You still are," Elias answered. "Chosen doesn't mean easy. It means worth it." She nodded, turning toward the hills, and as the sun dipped low, the dust behind her didn't feel like exile. It felt like clearing ground for something new. If you've ever walked away from what's broken to protect your peace, then stay with us. Clara's journey through the wilderness is far from over. The bunkhouse sat on a rise where the river curved through sun-bleached grass, the air still and quiet but never empty. Clara swept out years of dust, patched the shutters and planted rows of herbs behind the door. She made soap, brewed teas, bandaged small wounds for neighboring ranch hands who came hesitantly, then returned with thanks. She was no longer watched, but she was remembered. Children came first, drawn by curiosity and the smell of honey biscuits. Then mothers under the guise of needing mending or herbs for coughs. They came with quiet voices, some with bruises hidden beneath sleeves, others with confessions they hadn't spoken in years. Clara listened. She didn't preach, she didn't gossip, she simply listened and remembered. Letters arrived once a month, neat and careful, each from Elias. They never spoke of longing, only of faith. He wrote of scripture, of doubt, of moments when the church felt too small for God's mercy. She read each line like a tether, tied not to the past, but to something steady, alive. In Bell Cross, the seams began to split. Without Clara to absorb their bitterness, some folks turned on each other. Eleanor grew harsher, her words sharper, her following thinner. The girl Clara had seen behind the schoolhouse no longer attended Sunday school. No one asked why. Sheriff Cole, once indifferent, now watched the town with unease. He spoke less, stayed longer outside the chapel. Something troubled him. But trouble, like rot, doesn't always show until it spreads. Back at the edge of the river, Clara stood taller. Solitude no longer felt like punishment. It felt like calling. She taught children to read under the cottonwoods. She taught girls to mix tinctures and write their names with pride. She sang in the evenings, old hymns, quiet and full of grace. Her voice, once silenced, now carried across the water. One morning she received a letter not from Elias, but from a woman she didn't know. It read, My daughter came home with your words in her hands and light in her eyes. Thank you for giving her back her voice." Clara folded it gently and placed it beside Elias's letters, and still she kept her distance, not out of fear, out of choice. There was power in knowing she had rebuilt from ashes, not to prove them wrong, but to prove to herself she still had something sacred left to give. If you've ever stepped away to find who you are beyond the noise, then don't go far. Clara's story is about to meet the fire again, and this time she won't walk away alone. The first scream reached Clara like a crack of thunder rolling across the valley. She looked up from her garden, dirt still on her hands, heart tightening. Smoke. It curled black into the sky from the edge of town. Without thought, she ran, feet pounding the dirt, lungs burning, skirts flying behind her. As she neared the houses, people poured into the streets. Shouts, buckets, panic. Eleanor Harper's home blazed, the fire eating through the upper floor with terrifying speed. Someone sobbed near the porch, a woman clutching her apron, screaming a name. "Annie! She's inside! Eleanor's niece! We can't reach her!" Clara didn't pause. She pushed past the crowd and into the smoke, the heat hitting her like a wave. The world inside was chaos, wood splintering, walls groaning. She moved fast, dropping low, covering her mouth. "Annie! Annie! Annie!" A whimper. She followed it to the hall. Flames licked the ceiling. She found the girl curled beneath a table, coughing, eyes wide with terror. Clara pulled her close and wrapped her shawl around the child. "Hold on to me, don't let go." Together they moved through the blaze, Clara shielding the girl with her body. The roof cracked above them, smoke clawed at her throat, and then light. They stumbled through the front door and fell into dirt, coughing, choking, gasping. The crowd roared. A woman sobbed. Someone shouted her name. Sheriff Cole reached them first, helping them up. "Clara, are you—" "I'm fine," she rasped, voice raw. "She's safe." He looked at her like he'd never truly seen her before. The town watched in silence. No one spoke, no one dared. Eleanor arrived moments later, face white as chalk, hair wild, hands trembling. She fell to her knees beside her niece, holding her close. Then her eyes lifted, met Clara's, and something inside her cracked. No rage, no triumph, just silence. Padre Elias came running, breathless, kneeling beside Clara. "You're hurt." "No," she whispered. "Just smoke." He pressed his forehead to hers, brief, grounding. "You saved her." "I couldn't let another girl be lost," she murmured. "Not again." He helped her up, his hands steady on her arms. That night, no one whispered behind curtains. No one dared, because they'd all seen it. No rumor, no slant. Just Clara May Thompson running into fire for the very people who cast her out. And when Elias stood outside the chapel the next morning and placed his hand on Clara's shoulder, no one turned away. Not this time. If you've ever had to prove your worth in silence, only to be heard through courage, stay close. What comes next will change everything. The apology came quietly, without ceremony, as Clara sat beneath the cottonwood tree sharpening pencils for the children's lesson. One by one, townspeople approached, not with speeches but with soft voices, awkward hands, lowered eyes. "I judged too quickly," said the baker's wife, leaving a warm loaf beside her. "You did what none of us dared," muttered the schoolmaster, before turning away. Even Sheriff Cole came. He stood in silence for a moment before saying, "You saved that girl's life, Clara. And I let them drive you out. That's on me." Clara listened, nodded, accepted each word like bricks being laid, not for a wall, but for something lasting. Eleanor Harper did not speak. She had withdrawn from town life, no longer commanding pews or tea tables. She was seen sometimes at her window, eyes hollow, voice absent. Annie, the girl Clara saved, now came to school with her hair tied in ribbons and a notebook always close at hand. Elias, too, changed. He preached with fire but walked with softness. He challenged the gossips, dismantled the false pride of pews, and opened the chapel doors wider than ever before. And then, one evening, as the sun kissed the hills in gold, he came to Clara, holding a letter. "I've written to the bishop," he said. "I've asked to step down." Clara blinked. "Why?" "Because I cannot preach one truth while denying another." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch. Inside it, a ring. "I never stopped believing in my calling," he said, "but I've come to believe that love can be a calling too." She stared at the ring, breath caught. "You deserve joy, Clara. Not just peace, not just survival, but joy. Will you let me walk beside you, not as a priest, but as a man who sees you fully and still chooses you?" Tears welled in her eyes, not from shock, but recognition. She took his hand. "I've waited my whole life to be chosen," she said. "But not by a man, by something real. You make it real." He placed the ring on her finger. No crowd, no altar. Just two souls beneath the cottonwood, choosing each other with reverence. The next morning the town buzzed, not with scandal, but with blessing. For the first time, Clara May Thompson's name was spoken without hesitation. And if you've ever longed not just to be forgiven but to be cherished, don't go far. Clara's journey is about to come full circle. The chapel was full again, but this time there were no whispers, only warmth. The pews overflowed with faces once turned away from Clara, now drawn by something softer, stronger. She walked down the aisle in a gown the town's seamstress had offered to stitch, free of charge. Her bouquet held marigolds from her garden and wild juniper sprigs, symbols of endurance and grace. Elias waited at the front, no longer in a cassock, but in a plain brown suit, his eyes alight with peace. There was no priest, no veil, only two people exchanging vows not beneath doctrine, but beneath shared scars and chosen futures. Afterward, as they stepped out into the sun, the town stood in silence. Then one hand clapped, then another. And suddenly the street erupted in cheers, not forced, not hollow, but real. Even Eleanor Harper stood at a distance, face unreadable. She did not smile, she did not speak, but she bowed her head as Clara passed. Later that week, the doors to the old schoolhouse reopened, rebuilt by volunteers funded with small donations. A sign was carved and nailed above it, "The May School for Girls." Inside, Clara taught reading, writing, and dignity. She welcomed every child, especially those deemed difficult or wayward. She told stories, she taught plants and healing, and sometimes in quiet moments, she told them about the fire and how walking through it didn't burn her away but refined her. Elias helped build benches, taught carpentry, planted trees. At night, they read together, prayed together, lived not in exile but in quiet defiance of the shame once wielded against them. Bell Cross changed, not overnight, not in every heart, but enough. The chapel became known not for its rules, but for its refuge, and Clara's name, once spit like a curse, was now spoken with reverence. She did not forget. She did not pretend the hurt had never happened. But she rose from it. She bloomed in spite of it. And for those who still walked with heads low and hearts heavy, she remained a light, fierce, flawed, unyielding. If Clara's story moved something inside you, if you've ever felt cast out, labeled, silenced, remember this: redemption doesn't come from their permission. It begins the moment you choose yourself. So don't leave just yet. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like Clara's, stories of courage, of fire, of love earned the hard way. And if you're ready for the next journey, click the video on your screen now. Another life is waiting to be heard.